The state auditor recently released a report stating that the California Employment Development Department, or EDD, missed out on collecting $516 million in unemployment compensation overpayments by failing to participate in the U.S. Treasury's offset program. EDD claims it couldn't do the work necessary to collect the overpayments because it was chronically overcommitted and understaffed. Who's to blame? Can the money be recouped or the situation corrected? And while the oversight was reported to the state auditor by a whistleblower, what can be done to improve the oversight function of state agencies like the EDD? We'll ask California State Auditor Elaine Howle, Loree Levy, the Deputy Director of the California Employment Development Department, and California State University Fresno Political Science Professor Jeffrey Cummins. Unemployment comp reimbursements, penny wise and pound foolish?
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. The mission of the State Auditor's Office is to, quote, promote the efficient and effective management of public funds and programs, unquote. Recently, our guest, Elaine Howle, the state auditor, blew the whistle on a $500 million oversight by the state's Economic Development Department, or EDD, on their administration of the state's unemployment compensation program. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so a $500 million oversight. That's a pretty big oversight. How did you learn about this?
Actually, this is through the Whistleblower Protection Act. We received an anonymous complaint from individuals asserting that the Employment Development Department was not taking advantage of a federal program where the state could offset federal tax returns to recoup money that's owed to the state of California.
The Whistleblower Act, can you briefly describe that?
Sure. The Whistleblower Act is an act in state law that allows individuals, anyone, a member of the public, a state employee, to file a complaint with my office, either online, via the phone. They can drop in a complaint related to state operations or state actions by state employees that may be unlawful, inefficient, gross misconduct, those sorts of things. And it's a program that we're responsible for administering.
Do you get a lot of those complaints?
We get a lot of complaints. Usually, just via the hotline, we get over 400 calls a month.
Wow.
A lot of those, unfortunately, are not within our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction is state employees, court employees, but we try to refer those that are not within our jurisdiction to the appropriate authority. But many of them we do investigate.
But you've got to go through all of those to see if there's any there.
Right, right. We have a process where we try to do everything we can. We actually have a call center where you can actually talk to a human being calling the hotline, and that person tries to work with the complainant to get as much information as we can so that we can have some credible information or some credible leads to use to conduct the investigation.
You know, politicians always talk about fraud, waste, and abuse, and here's an agency that's really looking into that as their primary mission, so folks should be aware of that. Why don't you give us a little background on EDD and the U.S. Treasury's offset program that was kind of the focus of this investigation?
Sure. The Employment Development Department, of course, I'm sure most people know and your viewers know, that's the department that administers the unemployment insurance program. What the federal government did, the Department of Labor put out some information back in 2010 saying many of the state unemployment programs are basically running in the red. And we know that there are many overpayments out there. So we're going to allow states to benefit from the federal intercept program, where if the state submits information to the federal government, we would be able to intercept a tax refund that an individual is entitled to.
They go, oops, we've overpaid you, so we'll use that to reimburse.
So you intercept that tax refund and recoup the money that you overpaid that individual in unemployment benefits.
Okay, so let's walk through the timeline of events here. When did the offset program, you said it became available in 2010?
Right.
For these overpayments of unemployment compensation, what happened going forward? Because my understanding was that the state unemployment compensation fund, like you said, was in the red by several $billion.
That's correct. The state employment fund was in the red by up to $10 billion we owed the federal government. We've basically been borrowing money from the federal government. This program, the federal government, the Department of Labor again, said that we will, encourage states to participate in this offset program. That was back in 2010, and then they put guidance out in early 2011. So EDD was well aware of this program, but really didn't take any action to participate.
What do you mean didn't take any action? I mean, if they're aware of this program, it could collect a significant amount of money. Why didn't they act on it?
Right. What they told us is they were overwhelmed with a lot of different statutory responsibilities, and they were working on other projects. But again, when we challenged them, they had actually sent some staff to a webinar that the federal government put on, and their employees were very excited and said, with a minimal investment on the state, we would be able to recoup a significant amount of money. Back then, they estimated it would take them a little over $300,000 to update their system to allow them to submit the information to the federal government, and we would recoup in 1 year $100 million.
I think anybody would like that as a return on investment for sure. So you were talking about, I think one of the issues in your report talked about formatting, and one of the problems was that the state EDDs formatting, their computer formatting, wasn't appropriate for the federal, wasn't what the federal government needed, the Treasury Department needed. So was that the big problem here?
That was a problem certainly that EDD cited, but when we looked at what the federal government put out as far as guidance, there were many states in that same predicament. And what other states chose to do was invest in making modifications to their systems so that they could provide the information in the format the federal government needed. You really need a tax identifier number, and then specifically, of course, the individual's name. So the federal government put very specific guidance out, and other states were able to do it, so we were disappointed that California didn't take advantage.
All right, well, when we come back, what could California have done if it had been reimbursed for those overpayments for all those years? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're speaking with the state auditor, Elaine Howle, about a recent report she issued finding a $500 million oversight in the administration of the state's unemployment compensation program. So how much money are we talking about here?
The time frame we looked at was February 2011 through September of 2014 this year, and we identified $516 million that the state could have recouped in overpayments to individuals who received unemployment benefits.
So over $500 million. You mentioned that the state owes the federal government $10 billion because of the extension of unemployment compensation benefits during the recession. How much of that $516 million oversight could have been used to pay down that $10 billion debt the state owes to the federal government?
Great question. A significant portion of it, about $417 million out of the $516 million, would go back to the federal government, back into the unemployment fund at a federal level. But that leaves $99 million for the state of California. EDD could have used those funds for administrative purposes, or the money could have gone back into the general fund and been used for other programs.
That's you know, people throw around figures like $100 million like it's nothing. It's to most people, I think there'd be something. Don't we owe the federal government that the money we owe them, the $10 billion? We owe them with interest, don't we?
Absolutely, we're paying interest on that $10 billion. I don't have specifically amounts each year, but as that money sits out there and that debt we owe to the federal government, of course, they're going to charge interest on that, and the state will be liable for that as well.
So we've got it on the credit card and we're not paying it off. We all know that's probably not a good idea. You should pay off your credit cards and pay off your bills. What's happening then in other states? You were talking about that earlier. Was California slow off the mark in participating in the offset program?
Absolutely, very slow. Many other states, as soon as the federal government put out the regulations in early 2011, many states started implementing the program as soon as possible. The state of New York is a perfect example, very similar state in size and population. They implemented the program right away. And one of the things they did was they put a warning out to people. We're going to be implementing this program. And just by putting a warning out and sending letters to folks, they received $4 million from individuals who just voluntarily paid back the amounts that they had received as overpayments. But in addition to that, in the first year New York did the offset, they recouped 20% of the amounts that were owed to the state of New York. For California, that would have been over $200 million because we had outstanding payments of $1.4 billion. 20% of that's $280 million. So the state really made a big mistake in waiting.
My understanding from your report is there were 31 states that were already participating in the program. California still was on the sidelines.
That's correct. By 2013, 31 states had actually signed up and were using the offset program to recoup those overpayments. So California is way behind. When we talked with EDD, they were intending to get the program up and running by May of this year, this next month. But unfortunately, it looks like now they're not going to get it up and running until September.
You know, when the EDD responded to your report, they said, listen, we had other higher priority issues. The state legislature had set some deadlines we had to meet, and we were understaffed and overcommitted. You didn't seem to really accept those explanations. Why?
We didn't accept those explanations because of the point you made earlier, return on investment. If we have to invest $300,000 or perhaps $600,000, their newer estimate of what they need to do to the system is between $600,000 and $1 million. If you had told the legislature that you needed to invest that money and you would be able to recoup $100 to $200 million a year, we think the legislature would have been okay with that.
Okay. So what actions has the EDD taken as a result of your audit, and are they sufficient to address the problem?
Well, as I said, we're disappointed because we thought they would get the program up and running more quickly than they intend to. It won't be until September of 2014 for them to implement this offset program. The problem with that is many of federal tax refunds, people get their refunds between January and May. People file right away when they know they're getting money back. So we're going to miss out again on a window this year to recoup some overpayments. So they won't have it done until the fall.
Yeah, I was reading your report. It actually surprised me that 90% of the funds are given back by IRS by May. That seems pretty fast and a large amount.
That's correct. I mean, and we felt that was really important information for EDD to have to really try to get them to implement this program quickly so that we could take advantage of that window of opportunity. Because you can imagine if people know they're going to get a refund, they want to file right away and get that money from the IRS.
So as it is, they're not going to have it done until September. Most of that money's already been given back by the IRS, so maybe next year.
Right. We're going to have to wait until next year, until 2015.
So going forward, what are your recommendations, not just to fix the current problem, but to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
Well, as we discussed in the report, this was brought to the attention of very high-ranking officials at the department, and we were disappointed that their rationale was, we have other things on our plate and we can't do everything. You've really got to do an assessment, a return on investment assessment. So we have made recommendations that they really need to put some protocols in place that when you have an opportunity like this, you need to pay attention to it and really get on top of it.
So I assume that there are best practices in other states that they could point to, look to, maybe to adopt here in California?
I think other states certainly could serve as a model. Like you said, 31 other states jumped on this program right away and have really significantly benefited from it. And in fact, the federal government kept writing to EDD in California saying, all these other states are participating. We don't understand why California is not, especially with the debt burden that you have of $10 billion.
Well, I want to thank the State Auditor Elaine Howle for joining us. Up next, what exactly is the state doing to avoid this problem in the future? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. So how will the state's Economic Development Department plan to respond to the state auditor's report? Our guest is Loree Levy from the EDD. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
Well, Loree, now that you've received the state auditor's report, what is the EDD going to do to correct the problem?
Well, I think unfortunately when the audit came out, there wasn't much attention paid to the fact that the Employment Development Department greatly values the Treasury Offset Program, which is why we've been using it for many, many years now, actually, for the purposes of collecting delinquent taxes of many forms. And we've always as well committed to being able to use it for the purposes of benefit overpayments as soon as the resources were freed up. And at the time when this became available, we were in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression, and we were very, very thin on our staffing situation. We had 11 critical projects in play at the time to upgrade our infrastructure. So administrators at the time had to make a decision. Those projects were tied to $75 billion in tax revenue and unemployment and disability payments.
$75 billion?
$75 billion between collecting the tax revenue and paying out these benefit payments. So do you divert resources from those and put those at risk in addition to a project that was tied to American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars, $839 million of that, very time sensitive, or do you divert staff over to this project where we already have 8 other means of collecting benefit overpayments? overpayments. And so the decision at the time was delay until resources are available. That's occurred over a year ago, and so we're getting ready to implement the project now.
You're saying, though, that this project has turned out to be a little more complex than you anticipated. What are the unanticipated issues you're running into?
Well, again, at the time, we were very, very busy with a huge demand, which we were paying upwards of $22.9 billion in benefits at a time. Normally, we'd pay $5 to $6 billion in unemployment benefits. So it was a very busy time. We were only able to do a minimal analysis at the time on our what the projected timeline and so forth would be. Over the last year, as the team's gotten more into the details, they've learned some of the complexities associated with the way we use TOP now is in a very modernized tax collection system. We're going to have to tap into a very antiquated collection overpayment system, so collecting overpayments. And unfortunately, that means you have to take old data, translate it into a more modernized form that the Treasury needs. And so that's got some complexity associated with coding and new reports and ways in which we process payments, and that's all just much more complex than we had anticipated.
Yeah, so the formatting, I think originally, the auditor was saying was about $320,000 to kind of fix your formatting. Now it's closer, I think, to $1 million.
$1 million.
So it's gotten a little more expensive as you look more closely at it. Still, though, there was a good return on that investment. If you'd invested that, you would have probably gotten some money back for the state. Why didn't you go back to the legislature and kind of flag them on this, or did you, and say, we need more staff to get this job done?
Well, in fact, we did appear before the legislature. We had 11 critical projects on our portfolio. We had to take 3 of them off because we were so thin and staffed, and the legislature said, okay, that's what you're going to need to do. And then we diverted some other projects. And so again, we're getting to them. They've been delayed. This one, we're actually sending out the required advance notices starting next month, and then we anticipate being able to start sending the file over to the Department of Treasury, the U.S. level, in September. So we're getting closer. And again, the money was never lost. Overpayments, when they're established, remain established until we're able to collect upon them, or they're dismissed sometime later. So this, we've already had many tools in place to collect on those overpayments. This will give us another one, which we'll be actively using as soon as it's available.
So what procedures, new procedures, have you set in place to make sure this doesn't happen again? Or if you think there's a problem, to the extent there is a problem?
Well, I think that states are very challenged in trying to upgrade their infrastructure, which is very antiquated. A lot of these old legacy systems with COBOL language, I don't think they even teach that in college anymore. So
I would date myself to say that I actually know what you were talking about, but
so those are the big challenges we face, and so we've been really actively working to upgrade those systems. We worked through some obstacles we had when we first launched our new payment processing system for unemployment insurance last fall, and I think we've also put in place. Our new administrators that are here, have been able to put some processes in place where we're going out and collecting input from our frontline staff. And for over the last year, we've really been working to put new efficiencies in place and streamline our processes.
I wanted to ask you about that, not just about this particular program, but other management practices. I mean, there was an issue a while ago about a $100 million computer system overhaul. There were some issues at EDD. What new management practices are putting in place to make sure that the EDD is run more efficiently and effectively?
Well, I think that, first of all, we were just been overwhelmed by demand. And with the recession, it's unprecedented in nature in terms of what we were dealing with. But as we've been able to go back now, we've been facing a critical problem that is underfunding at the federal level that we need to administer this program. And so we had staffing challenges. Fortunately, there's a couple things that have come around. Number one, we've worked through some of those challenges involved with that new payment processing system. So that's finally alleviated some workload. Demand has started to come down a little bit. Federal extensions have gone away, and unfortunately for a lot of our claimants. And then, of course, we got some funding authority assistance from the state, which has been critical because we've all been able now to keep staff from leaving the department. No more hiring freeze. We can keep going up with overtime and using that to our benefit. And we've been able to put some efficiency measures in place over the last year, which really have paid off, and we're turning the corner and really making some great improvements in our services.
So this has actually led to some changes in management and staffing that you're hopeful that it's not going to happen again.
No, I think another key thing too is let's just hear from our employees. Let's make sure that they're on the front line of the operations. What ideas do they have? We've got methods in place by which we can collect that, implement some of those ideas, and we're seeing some great returns already. Yeah,
you can get some great ideas from frontline staff for sure. Well, I want to thank Loree Levy from the EDD for joining us. Up next, how will the governor and the legislature respond? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're now coming to you from the Valley PBS studios in Fresno. Do we have to rely solely on whistleblowers to ferret out government fraud, waste, and abuse? What about the role of the executive and legislative branches? Our guest is California State University Fresno political science professor, Professor Jeffrey Cummins. Welcome back to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So first of all, is there a larger bureaucratic question here with the state auditor's report? I mean, is this an example of systemic problems within state agencies, or do you think this was an isolated occurrence?
No, I think it's symptomatic of some of the larger bureaucratic issues that the state and any public agencies are dealing with, where coming out of the Great Recession, a lot of these agencies cut way back and their staff have not been restored. The general feeling is that Employment Development Department did not have enough staff to allocate towards these different projects, and in this particular one it would have generated a significant amount of revenue for the state.
So it begs the question, why did they ask for more staffing?
Well, they should have, and I think that would have been the way to deal with it, is to go back to the legislature, say, here are our priorities, we're trying to deal with these ones that you've already given us. Should this one take precedence over these other priorities that you've given us? And so really, that was a failure of leadership on their part to raise this issue back to the legislature.
Or they could have gone to the governor's office. Does the governor's office have any responsibility here? I mean, EDD is part of the governor's administration.
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to say that the governor doesn't have any responsibility at all. Is he going to be looking for these sort of issues, or is it an issue that should have been brought to his attention? I would say the latter, that it should have been brought to his attention. You know, take it to the governor. Does he want us to reallocate our resources to take care of it? I'm sure he would have said yes, given the amount at stake here. So it was really a failure on the part of the agency leadership to raise this issue to a higher level so that they could reallocate their resources.
You know, the legislature, I mean, people sometimes forget that one of the functions of the legislature is oversight, making sure the laws are being enacted as intended. Did the legislature drop the ball on this one in terms of legislative oversight?
I think so, and it's one of the casualties of term limits. There's some research out there that says when term limits were implemented, that the oversight activities of the legislature went down.
Why is that? What do you think that is?
Well, with oversight, if you think about how oversight takes place, it's painstaking research and inquiry, developing an expertise and an understanding of how these state agencies work. It's the ability to ask the right questions, right? If you don't understand what the agency is doing, you can't ask the right questions about whether or not you can function more efficiently. And so one of the consequences of term limits has been the reduction of policy expertise on the part of legislators and their staff, and so they don't know what questions to ask.
I mean, they're in office for, at least they were, for such a short period of time. They're barely getting up to speed and they're running for another office. So what about this change in the law that allows legislators longer term limits, 12 years in each house? What do you think about that? Is that going to improve legislative oversight?
I mean, I think, you know, just based on the logic that it went down with very short term limits, 6 and 8 years in the Assembly and Senate respectively, it should increase, assuming that legislators are going to want to stay in their chambers for longer and develop that expertise, also that their staff are going to remain with them longer, and that they'll conduct more oversight. And part of this oversight is supposed to happen in budget hearings. This is a major budget issue here. And so you would hope that the amount of time devoted to these hearings would increase. But at the same time, these are politicians, and they're looking to pad their resumes, and oversight is not always one where they're looking to do that. It's more sponsoring a bill, creating a program, expanding a program, and so on, and they think that is what is going to get them reelected.
It's interesting, you know, but a lot of politicians run on fraud, waste, and abuse, and I would think this would be a perfect example of look what I found, but I guess it didn't happen this time. Let me ask you one last question. What do you think should be done to improve the administrative and legislative oversight?
Well, I think one of the things that can be done is just devoting more resources to it. There's actually several different agencies that are involved in these types of audits. There's an auditing unit at the Department of Finance. There's auditors at the State Controller's Office. There's, of course, the state auditor's office. All of those units and agencies can be, their budgets could be augmented. You could add more staff so that they could perform more regular audits of different agencies. But also just on the part of the legislature, having more hearings and bringing these agencies in on a regular schedule, having them come back and address questions that have been asked before. All of those things can help enhance the oversight function.
Well, I hope they're listening. Good ideas. I want to thank California State University professor Jeff Cummins, as well as Loree Levy from the Department, the California Employment Development Department, and the California State Auditor, Elaine Howle, for joining us. If you want to stay current on Valley and state politics, you can sign up for our award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging onto our website at maddyinstitute.org. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.